Well, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Well, first of all, let me wish all of you a happy holiday, depending on what you do and what you like and what you're all about when it comes to this holiday. Have a great one, you and your family. Hey, guess what? It's decision time soon for those seeking college admission. Actually, it's been going on all year. Let's talk a little bit about public higher education. But first, Pennsylvania is a huge energy state. What does that all mean? Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, here we are. We're on the eve of Christmas, and it's a great holiday, and I hope you celebrate it and have a great time. It's a great time for family, right? For everybody getting together. Everybody I talk to. I'm talking, by the way, to Terry Fitzpatrick. He's often on the show. He's the CEO of the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, the former Public Utilities Commissioner. I always mention that. I have to mention that because you understand the intricacies of a lot of regulations that go on.
Thanks, Terry.
But it is an interesting time, I think, particularly when you can get together with so many friends and so many associates and you go back and visit old people. I do that all the time. How did I get onto that? That's not what we're talking about.
But it's the spirit of the season. I think that's terrific.
There you go. All right, let's talk about this. Pennsylvania, historically, and even today, is a huge energy state. What is there about the state that makes it one of the nation's leading energy producers?
I think a couple things, Terry. First of all, we're blessed with abundant energy resources here. And of course, historically, that was coal. That's probably one of the first things. Oil was first drilled here. Can't forget that either.
Yeah, that's right.
And more recently, of course, natural gas, as well as nuclear power, which we have a significant presence of nuclear power here. And more recently, renewable energy as well.
Yeah. And that made, historically, Pennsylvania a huge element in the Industrial Revolution, correct?
Absolutely.
That made America, go ahead, finish.
Absolutely, yes. Anthracite coal, bituminous coal, very, very much a key component of the Industrial Revolution. Another thing that's been important here in Pennsylvania is I think we've tended to avoid some political extremes historically. So, and I think in more recent years, that's enabled us to develop our energy resources where, for example, a state like New York, which has some different political philosophy, has banned hydraulic fracturing for natural gas.
Right.
So that's also a factor.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the employment significance of that, but what has made, but let's talk first of all about the employment.
Correct.
There's a huge number of hundreds of thousands of people, is that about right, that are involved, or would you say even increase that are one way or another directly involved in energy production?
Yes.
And it could be when you take subsidiary activities, meaning people who serve the people, who supply the people who work in these industries, you're talking about a significant portion of our population, right?
A huge impact when you consider those involved in producing natural gas, coal, for example, as well as all the utility workers that you tend to get it to the people where they live and where they work.
Right. So as time, in more recent times, there was, I'll be candid, a blowback to coal, let's be honest.
Yes.
Because of the carbon emission. So then we have nuclear power that comes along you know, the big factor is the lack of carbon.
Correct.
And then we have natural gas, which, is it dominating the energy activity in this state, would you say?
It's certainly been the biggest factor over the past 10 years or so. I mean, natural gas has been around for a long time, but with the technological breakthroughs that allowed hydraulic fracturing and the fact that we had the Marcellus Shale formation here, that really has risen to the fore. So the trend has been towards natural gas, and you mentioned the environmental regulation of coal, the environmental problems with the carbon emissions. The other thing that's happened is that's part of it. The other part is just purely economic. I mean, we have so much gas, the price has gone down so much, it's made it very difficult for coal to compete.
Yeah, so long term, and then we'll see what happens with nuclear power, something I want to talk with you about. Right. But overall, the real debate, it seems to me, well, there are aspects of the natural gas industry that are subject to this debate, but it's getting the natural gas from where it comes out of the wells to sources even out of the state, which means pipelines, and that's created some controversy, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of it. That's certainly a big part of it. It's always hard to build infrastructure, whether you're talking about roads or power lines, or in this case, natural gas pipelines. It's tough to cite it. You do have some folks that that have a ideological perspective that we shouldn't have any kind of fossil fuels, for example. I think the climate, everything that happens in the energy sphere, Terry, I don't think you can analyze hardly any of these issues without thinking about climate change, because concern about climate change is a big factor in opposition to some of these projects.
Right. All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about this Keep It in the Ground movement, and you can weigh in on that. We'll talk about that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, I'm chatting with Terry Fitzpatrick. He heads the Energy Association of Pennsylvania. We're talking about all things energy, the ups and the downs. All right, there's a Keep It in the Ground movement. Until you and I chatted in advance of this program, I never even heard of that. What is it? Maybe I'm naive. What's going on with that?
Well, it's a movement among folks concerned about the environment, concerned probably mostly about climate change, that think we just should completely eliminate our use of fossil fuels, hence to keep it in the ground, keep the gas in the ground, keep the coal in the ground. And that's often part of the energy that's behind the opposition to some of these infrastructure projects that we're talking about. Now, I've been around this stuff a long time, Terry, a lot of it in public service with the PUC, working in the legislature, for example. And I respect the opinions of different people on these things. But I really think it's very unrealistic to think that we're going to immediately abandon fossil fuels. 80 worldwide and in our nation, over 80% of our energy comes from fossil fuels when you talk about petroleum products, natural gas, coal. Now, we're probably going to see a shift away from that somewhat, but to think that we can immediately do that and just cut it off completely is unrealistic, and it would really hurt our economy and, ironically, keep us from developing some of the technologies that we're going to need to reduce carbon emissions.
So what you're basically saying is that obviously carbon emissions have to be reduced, but it has to be done in an orderly way that doesn't create huge unemployment, conceivably wreck the economy, produce lots of unemployment, and indeed get in the way of the technology that would help reduce carbon emission. Is that?
That's very well said. I think you're the energy expert, Terry. No, that's perfect. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So the other aspect, and here's what's fascinating with the nuclear plants. There's been the ups and the downs with the nuclear industry. But now it's almost as though people are looking to the nuclear industry. There's no carbon emission here. We have other sorts of problems. We all remember TMI back when just after Governor Thornburg took office, way back when. But the point I want to make here is that now seems far more acceptable than it did even 30 years ago. Am I wrong about that?
Well, I think with some folks it is. I think there's still some opposition to nuclear power, but I agree. I think there's a growing recognition, even among environmentally minded folks, that since it does not nuclear power does not emit carbon, that's a factor that needs to be considered.
But wouldn't the carbon factor play into the climate change, which is, you know, obviously climate change is a problem. We have to deal with it. The question is, and I think you're making the point, how we deal with it in a way that doesn't, you know, indeed threaten the economy.
Here's the irony, Terry. With other environmental problems that we face, things like acid rain or smog, the way we tackled them was to regulate the emissions that led to that problem. But with climate change, our policy now is trying to tackle that without regulating carbon emissions.
Right.
If we did regulate carbon emissions, nuclear power would have a leg up in the energy market because it doesn't emit carbon. So the uncertainty over our climate change policy is a big part of what's the problem that nuclear power is facing.
All right, let's go to another aspect of this. Is there anything going on in the Pennsylvania legislature that relates to this subject that we're talking about? Is there any go ahead, take it.
Well, there are always bills to try to increase the amount of renewables that we have to buy in the state. I do think that with the nuclear issue, there's a really good chance that in the coming session there's going to be a vigorous debate about whether there should be some help to the nuclear industry. As you know, there's a nuclear caucus in the legislature that's come out with a report really calling for some assistance to those plants. So I do think we're going to see a debate on that issue.
All right, well, look, I want to thank you for coming in. You'll keep coming back and give us updates and keep us posted on this. All right, higher education, public higher education, what's its future? Hang around and we'll give you some help.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, joining me to talk about some aspects of higher education is Dr. Ken Mash. He's the president of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. They represent the professors and the coaches in public higher education at the state system of higher ed. I want to talk about some aspects of higher ed and why that's important, not just because hundreds of thousands of young people have to make decisions about where to go to college in the state or out of the state, where they choose and where they live. That's a pretty big now you're a professor at East Stroudsburg University. You deal with this all the time. That's a huge decision, isn't it?
The decision about where to go to college is extremely important. I mean, it's where you're going to be spending 4 years. It's picking a program that's going to be impacting your entire life. So these are really important decisions that young people and their parents are making at this time, and we look forward to them making that decision to go to one of our universities.
Well, of course, everybody does. All right, well, let's start out with, tell our viewers a little bit about the state system, the diversity of it, the geographical dispersion. Talk about that.
Sure. So the state system of higher education is made up of 14 universities. They are the only truly public universities in the Commonwealth. It's
wholly owned by the state.
Wholly owned by the state. So it includes schools like Millersville and California University of Pennsylvania, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, Mansfield University. So we are in kind of a great position. We've had some challenges over the last few years, but I think we're meeting those challenges head on. And we, because of our distribution across the Commonwealth, our impact goes not only to the students that we serve, but also to the communities. I
want to build on that. The public universities are scattered throughout the state, many of them in rural areas where they are the leading employer, and the geographic dispersion seems to me to be a huge and significant aspect of the education, so that young folks can commute, depending where they live, and some people can't can't travel, can't move for lots of a variety of reasons, and then you have continuing ed programs. Go ahead, that allow them.
Yeah, well, our universities, they try and bring students from all across the Commonwealth to their campuses, but it's generally true that they serve primarily those counties that are around their universities. And you're absolutely correct. If you look at a place like Clarion, Clarion University, great institution, but it's in a rural area, and if our universities weren't there, you're right, those communities would suffer horribly. They're the number one, number two employer in most cases in their counties. And not only that, they provide opportunities for these students. Without those universities, these would really be higher education deserts.
Yeah.
There would be no place for students to go to be able to get an affordable
particularly
education.
those that can't be mobile for a whole variety of reasons. The other, even though the colleges have diversified considerably, it's still the major producer of teachers for both, for whether we're talking about elementary school, middle school, or high school, correct? Still?
Yeah, we have a lot of teacher ed programs at our universities. We have, in recent years, cut back a bit because there was concerns about there not being positions available. But now we find ourselves in a situation where we're talking about teacher shortages. So, we do provide a lot of teachers that are out there, but, we're doing some really imaginative programs too. Like I just mentioned Clarion.
Yeah.
They're involved with opioids and fighting the opioid problem in the Commonwealth, and they've created a program meant to train people to help with those who are suffering.
Yeah. Plus, I think they can adapt programs to the specific geographic region that helps the economy. It just doesn't help the students who then, could get the college degree and move out. But if you want to stay in those areas, these universities have programs that benefit the economy of the region.
Yeah, and in recent years, they've been looking much more at what the particular needs are in those areas. But at the same time, what we want to be able to do is to provide opportunities for those students who reside there, not just necessarily based on what's available around them, but to give them those opportunities around the Commonwealth.
Good point.
And one of the I think the more exciting things as we move forward is to look at how can we do a better job coordinating. We have 14 universities.
Spread out.
they largely act independently at this point, and I think we have a new chancellor.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. We're going to run to a break. I want to talk about the leadership and the direction. I think that's something important to talk about, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Well, welcome back. I'm chatting with Dr. Ken Mash. He's the president of the Association of the Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. Truth in Advertising. When I was on the faculty at Millersville University, I was heavily involved in this organization. I want to make that clear, not hiding anything. All right, Ken, let's talk about something else. You have, because you're publicly owned, the state system's publicly owned, that means that you have leadership, and it's based in Harrisburg under a particular state law. We don't have to get into that. But the direction, the design, where the universities go is in many ways directed by a central authority in Harrisburg, or am I on Mars? Am I completely wrong about that?
Well, it's interesting because it's kind of a federation
of
universities, so there's a lot of decision-making that takes place still at that university level. But I think one of the exciting things for us in this era where Pennsylvania has to do a better job funding our universities. We are 48th, as far as funding per capita in the country. But even with that, we can do a better job finding ways to coordinate, to do things together so that we provide greater opportunities for students and help build the Commonwealth.
Yeah, now, is there an aspect of, is there a redesign necessary, do you think? Is it something that radically needs to happen to the universities?
Yeah, well, so this chancellor has come in. The system has already been talking about ways that they can improve. There have been studies in the legislature which have talked about our universities. I think that we're all engaged, and one of the things that this new chancellor, Dan Greenstein, has done has, instead of, making things confrontational where it's one university versus the other, or the faculty versus the administration, has said, we need to come together to see what can we do better and always keep the students first in our minds. And let's see if we can't all get on board to try and do that.
Is there anything specifically that you think needs to be adjusted to make this is all about ultimately the students. I mean, that's why the universities exist, to benefit the students. Is there anything in particular that you would cite that would be helpful?
Well, as funds have, dissipated, we have
funds for the system.
For the system, we've seen some programs closing down at universities. That doesn't work for the benefit of the students. It denies them opportunities, whether we're talking about something in professional studies or whether we're talking about music or something like that. So we've been talking about for a number of years of ways of having the universities really truly collaborate, and instead of shutting programs down, perhaps running programs in concert with one another, so that, again, we don't cut back on those opportunities we provide to our students. And I'm excited about that. I think that for the first time, that might be something that we can do. And so that those programs that might be smaller, again, if you're working across the universities, they could be larger
collaborate.
enough.
And the other aspect of this is there's, as you know, changes going on in higher ed, the demands. I mean, liberal arts is still always and probably will be very strong, and it's important. But there are vocational and technical education programs that are important to the economy of the state as well, right?
Yeah, and it's my personal opinion, not an APSCUF position.
You're allowed to have it. You're allowed to have it.
But, it's my personal opinion that we really, I don't think higher ed is kept up necessarily with high-tech occupations. And we should be asking ourselves, as these occupations become more sophisticated, what is that relationship that should exist with a college degree and some of these jobs? If they're highly, if they are so highly technical, we should be thinking, well, how do we incorporate that into the college experience and both give students more opportunities, give employers people who are prepared to do this work, and really benefit the Commonwealth.
Point. And it also means, I think, working with various external communities, whether it be business, labor, technical, doing more of that interaction, correct?
Oh, absolutely. We have to continue to have conversations about what the needs of the Commonwealth are, but we also need to be respectful for the fact that we still have among people, this general sense that a college degree is something that's important, that it changes your life, and we need to be able to provide that in an affordable way.
All right, thanks for coming in.
My
Keep
pleasure.
us updated.
Happy holidays.
All right, happy holidays. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.